This is the Ear Science Podcast, the science of healthy hearing.
Hello and welcome to the Ear Science Podcast, the science of healthy hearing, proudly presented by Ear Science Institute Australia, a medical research institute. In this podcast, we'll bring you into our world, the world of ear and hearing science, together with Jordan Bishop, audiologist and community coordinator at Lions Hearing Clinic. We'll discuss the latest in ear and hearing research and what it means to you.
I'm Dan Vandermeer. I'm a digital content specialist and podcast host, and I'm passionate about raising awareness for the impact of hearing loss.
And I'm Lisa Kutsia. I'm a qualified audiologist and Chief Operating Officer at Ear Science Institute Australia.
Jordan, welcome to the Ear Science Podcast, the science of healthy hearing. You're a qualified audiologist, tick. Dedicated your career to hearing, including as a clinician and an educator, tick, tick. We are so excited today because you're going to share with us your Hearing 101, in quotes, and all the key information we need to know to look after our hearing. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Awesome.
Jordan, this podcast is dedicated to ear and hearing health, but we really want to this episode sort of step back and really understand hearing, understand the impacts of hearing loss, understand how we can protect our hearing. So Jordan, let's start with, how do we actually hear?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start. Especially if we want to understand hearing loss, it's a really good to have a good understanding of how sound is meant to travel through the auditory pathway when the ear is functioning well. So the first thing to know is that we have three parts to our ear: the outer, middle, and inner ear. So sound travels through the air as a wave, and it enters the ear through the outer ear. The part on the outside of our ear is called the pinna. I'm sure we've all seen it. We're all aware of it.
Yep.
And its function is to collect those sound waves and funnel them into the ear canal. That sound wave will travel down the ear canal until it hits the next part of the ear, the middle ear.
Right.
In the middle ear, we have our eardrum, which is a membrane. It's the membrane that actually separates the outer and the middle ear. And we also have our auditory ossicles, those three tiny ear bones that are in our ear. They're called the malleus incus and the stapes. So what happens is the malleus is fixed to the eardrum, and as sound enters the ear canal and hits the eardrum, it forces it to vibrate. The vibration of that eardrum then moves the malleus and in turn the other two ossicles, and in that way sound gets from the outer ear and is conducted through the middle ear. That way it can finally reach that final part of the ear, the inner ear. And again, I think a lot of people are quite familiar with the part of the inner ear called the cochlea. Yep. That's our hearing organ. I don't know if you've seen it, Dan. It's like a snail shell shape.
Yes.
And this organ is lined with tiny hair cells and is filled with fluid. So as those middle ear bones move, it moves that fluid in the inner ear, which moves those tiny hair cells. And as those tiny hair cells are moved and bent, particular cells will stimulate the nerve below. And that sound wave that we had right at the beginning can be converted into electrical impulses that can be interpreted by the brain.
Jeepers, so it's like perfect engineering.
Yeah, and actually what's even more interesting is when we look at the organization of the cochlea, how it's actually organized, which is by pitch. Yeah. So high-pitched sound and low-pitched sound actually travel differently through the air and through the ear. Yeah. And so they stimulate different areas of the cochlea. And what we see is that cochlea, you can almost imagine it like a piano in the ear with the high-pitched sounds right at the beginning and the lower-pitched sounds at the end. Yeah. And so not only does it convert those sound into those electrical impulses so that we can hear sound, but we can hear different pitches as well.
So clearly an educator. I'll learn more in that 2 minutes than in entire year 11 human biology. So thank you.
You're welcome. I was even fixated on that explanation. That was really, really good, Jordan. Jordan, the three sections of the ear. Can you explain to us the things that can go wrong there? Now, if something goes wrong in each of those sections, is it different types of hearing losses? Is the impact different?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if any of these parts of the ear go wrong, we can get a hearing loss. And that's exactly how we separate different types of hearing loss. Okay. So we're looking at which part of the ear is affected, where along that pathway is the transmission of sound being interrupted. So pretty broadly, we would separate them into two main types of hearing loss. We call them conductive hearing loss and sensorineural hearing loss. And the difference between those is exactly what part of the ear is being affected. So in a conductive hearing loss, it's exactly how it sounds. There's a problem with that conduction of sound through the outer or the middle ear.
Yep.
But that hearing organ itself, it's functioning perfectly. Right. So the idea is that whatever's blocking that ear, whether it be maybe wax or fluid, oftentimes if we can remove that, theoretically, the hearing should return back to normal. So in a lot of cases, or in some cases with conductive hearing loss, there can actually be treatment for that kind of hearing loss. Sensory neural hearing loss is a bit different. It's actually the opposite. So in this particular situation, the outer and the middle ear, they're functioning beautifully. We can test them and sound can get through that canal. It can get through that middle ear beautifully. But something has damaged that cochlea, and damage to the cochlea is generally permanent. A good example of this would be age-related hearing loss, for example.
Which is quite common, obviously, as a condition for more older people. That's
absolutely. I mean, hearing loss in general is quite prevalent. We estimate 1 in 6 Australians, but that's increasing to about 1 in 4 over the age of 65.
As we get older,
So we definitely do expect this. We do expect a gradual deterioration in hearing over time. But we expect it to be very gradual. And it can be so gradual that sometimes people themselves might not even notice it. It might be the people around them that notice it.
Well, I asked this next question with some trepidation because I'm a proud played in rock bands and on loud stages and played guitar next to too many drum kits to count. But anyway, what are the typical causes of hearing loss, and what can we do to protect our hearing? Obviously, we can't turn back time and reverse the aging process. What can we do to protect our hearing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yes, like we said, we can't. Age-related hearing loss is a very common cause of hearing loss. We can't turn back that time. But what I would say is we can test our ears early and often for age-related hearing loss. We may not be able to prevent it, but we can definitely, step in early and check those ears early. Typical cause of hearing loss that's entirely preventable, though, is, as you said, noise-induced hearing loss. So in terms of what we can do to protect our ears, there's so many different types of hearing protection on the market. Ear muffs, earplugs. You can even visit an audiologist and get very good quality custom-made hearing protection. So there's really no reason not to protect our ears, because the noise-induced hearing loss is permanent and entirely preventable.
And I will say, I worked in the building industry in the sort of 90s and 2000s early quite a bit. And back then, there was no talk of hearing, you walk into a loud factory and there was no earplugs to put in. Now it's everywhere and it's great. That's a really great step forward for us, I think, being aware of the health and safety particularly with our ears. I think it's great.
And it's also important to note, Jordan, that it's not just noise exposure like on a work site, but it's music as well. So even sounds that you enjoy, if it's too loud, that can be damage to your hearing as well. And there are hearing plugs that can preserve the quality of sound, just bring the volume down.
Yes.
So many people in a music setting don't necessarily want to wear it because they want to hear the music. But we just need to bring that volume down.
And Jordan, as a parent, I've got kids who listen to iPads and I can hear, through their headphones, the in-ear ones, what they're listening to. That's way too loud, isn't it?
I would say as a general rule, if somebody else can hear the music, outside of the headphones, it's probably too loud. I mean, I guess another general rule is if after you've been to a concert or you've been exposed to noise, if your ears, ring, that can also be a sign that was probably too loud. So there are two sort of rules of thumb that you can take when you're thinking about, noise, especially with younger people and with children. The thing about noise exposure is you want to take into account two different factors. You want to look at how loud the sound is, so the intensity, and also how long you're exposed to that sound for.
Okay, yes.
So these two things actually work together. I mean, you can put yourself at risk for a permanent hearing loss, even with a very brief singular exposure to noise, if that intensity of the noise is loud enough. So, like a noise blast, an explosion, these are kind of things, they can actually damage our hearing straight away. But then you can take other sounds that maybe are not dangerous in a short exposure time, but maybe over a long day, that's when you're going back to industrial noise exposure, these kind of things. That way the sound can become dangerous. So I guess my message for sort of kids, for younger people, would be what strategies can you implement with music to go back to those two principles?
Yeah, sure.
So how can we reduce that intensity? We can turn the volume down. at a concert, we can step further away from the
Yep.
speaker. How can we reduce our exposure to the time that we're exposed to that noise? And also, can we implement some of that hearing protection? As Lisa said, there is hearing protection designed to still be able to enjoy music. So
Yes.
just those three things together.
Yep, fantastic. So that's great, and I'm going to take this home because, at the risk of sounding like an annoying dad, I'm going to be that annoying dad. But what messages can I tell kids at a relatable level to get them thinking about mitigating hearing loss?
Yeah, I think we can sort of make it about this idea of safe versus unsafe sound, and also educating them, on the risks of exposing themselves to this unsafe sound.
Yeah.
So bringing in those strategies and letting them know that, it's very important for them to do these strategies so that they can protect their hearing, they can protect their ears.
Yeah. And then someone like me who, I'm 50 this year and I've had a history of rock music and loud factories and stuff. I mean, obviously, I should go and get checked.
I definitely agree that you should have your hearing checked. And I also think that you really want to start protecting your ears now if you haven't been this whole time. It really is never too late to start protecting your ears. Noise exposure will just continue to damage ears if you keep exposing yourself to it. So it's really never too late to start wearing hearing protection.
Okay.
Well, I think a very important thing to keep in mind is definitely to come in early for treatment. So there are many different treatments available, but a lot of them will be more beneficial if you come in earlier.
Yeah.
In terms of the general types of treatments, the most common type is probably hearing aids. It's the intervention that people are most familiar with. And the reason it's the most common is because they're the most versatile option that we have. The type of treatment that we recommend depends on a lot of factors. It depends on, the degree of hearing loss, and it depends on what people want to achieve. But hearing aids are really versatile because they can be fit to a wide range of people and they can help in a wide variety of situations. So they still remain a really popular treatment. For particular candidates, though, implantable solutions are gaining popularity because the candidacy criteria is always expanding for them.
So that's a cochlear implant or a bone conduction implant.
Exactly. One of the interventions that are surgically implanted.
Yep.
Jordan, I'll just pick up the comment you said about hearing implants and cochlear implants. The number of people that actually need a cochlear implant that has one is still very low. It's almost 92% of people that need one actually don't have one. So if anybody wants to find out a little bit more about implants, understand who are candidates for implants, in season 1 we had Renelle Chester-Brown, one of our senior implant audiologists, give us everything about implants. So tune in on that episode for that information, or speak to an audiologist.
Yes. Jordan, we've been talking all sorts of hearing loss topics in this podcast series, both this season and last. Everything ranging from genetics and stem cells to dementia. One thing that all of us deal with in one way or another when it comes to our ears is earwax.
Correct.
Me personally, it's not something we really notice until it becomes a problem. Why do we have earwax, and how does it cause issues?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's something. It's a topic that I get questions on so much in the clinic. People have a lot of questions about earwax. So the first thing to know is that earwax is incredibly normal. We're meant to have earwax in our ears. Our ear produces it for a reason. It's produced to protect the ear from things like dust, bacteria. So we do expect to see wax in the ear.
Yep.
You don't need to clean all of the wax out of the ear so it's completely clear. I mean, everyone's different. Some people produce less wax, some people produce more, but we do expect to see that wax. And something that a lot of people don't know is that our ears are actually self-cleaning. They're designed to clean themselves. So when wax is produced, it sort of adheres to the skin in the ear canal. And the interesting thing about the skin in the ear canal is that it actually grows outwards. So as the skin grows outwards, it takes that wax along with it and it eventually cleans the ear. And this mechanism works great unless there is a lot of wax in the ear or unless we're pushing that wax a little too deep inside the ear, and then suddenly problems can come about. So wax is not a problem unless it's fully blocking the ear. I'd say if it's not fully blocking the ear, just leave it.
Right. Okay.
So, Jordan, you sort of said just leave it if it's not blocking, but if it is blocking or it's becoming a problem, what do you do?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I can definitely tell you what not to do. And that would be not to stick cotton buds in there. Please don't put anything in your ears. No tools, no implements, no cotton buds. I mean, I would tell you some of the tools people have used, but I don't want to give anyone any ideas. So I think really don't put anything in your ears. If it is causing you discomfort, wax, when it's very blocking in the ears, can sometimes cause discomfort. It can feel full. It can feel like you have a hearing loss. Sometimes it can be slightly painful. If you're getting any of these symptoms, definitely you'll be looking to get the earwax removed. But that's not something to do yourself. That's something to do with someone who's trained to do that procedure. So there's definitely a few ways you can go about that. I would probably go to the pharmacy first and get some wax softening drops. So if wax is really hard, it becomes quite difficult to remove. So the softening drops just kind of make it a bit easier for us to remove. And then there's a few different ways you can go about removal. You could see a GP or a nurse for them to flush out the ears. They use water to flush out the ears often. And then there's also another procedure called microsuction, which is really, really helpful. We use a little vacuum to kind of suck the wax out. Sometimes it can be a little bit more pleasant than the irrigation or the syringing with the water. And that can be sometimes done at the GP or nurse. It depends on what kind of equipment they have. And it can also be done through some audiologists as well.
Okay.
The main thing I would say is just make sure whoever you're seeing is properly trained to remove the wax.
Definitely the microsuction is a much safer option of getting that wax removed.
Yeah, safer and probably more comfortable as well. I mean, I've been through both and I definitely preferred the microsuction.
Okay.
Jordan, can you let me know the role of the audiologist in managing wax? And if people, you say if it's blocking, people may experience hearing loss. Is it quite often that the cause of the hearing loss is wax blockage?
Yes and no. I think there's more of a story there. So sometimes wax is only a problem. It will only cause a hearing loss if it's fully blocking the ear. And an audiologist plays a really great role in telling you if it's blocking the ear or not, because they can see if it's blocking the ear. If you've gone through a doctor to have wax removed and the wax has been removed and you're still having hearing difficulties, it is so important to follow up with a hearing test, because the sensation of having a blocked ear with wax and the sensation of having a hearing loss are actually very similar. So what we notice is a lot of people come to us and they say, I had this blocked ear, I went to the doctor, they cleared it out, but it still feels blocked, but they tell me there's nothing in there. Can you have a look for me? And then I look in there and it's clear. I mean, you've had this before as well, Lisa. And that's because those two feelings are quite similar. So I think the audiologist plays a really important role in just making sure of what the hearing is like after wax removal, if there are still those hearing concerns.
Yeah, so that's fantastic. And that's clear lesson out of that is stay away from earbuds, right?
Please. It's so tempting, and you feel, you maybe feel satisfied when you see a bit of wax on the end of a cotton bud, but actually what you don't realize is you've probably pushed a whole heap of wax further in.
Yeah.
And no ear candles.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, they can. Nothing.
Nothing. Yeah, okay. I think something else that our listeners would like to experience and learn about is I go and see an audiologist. What happens in that appointment? I come to see you or Lisa and have an appointment. What happens?
That's a great question, and I'm really glad you asked, so I can give people a bit of an idea of what they can expect. I do this all the time with GPs so that they can learn about what their patients will expect. But I think it's a really useful thing for people to know before they come in as well. So it's a really comprehensive appointment. I think that's the first thing to know, and it can also really help to bring someone. I think because it is a comprehensive appointment, we try, if you're going to come in, you're going to give us, your time. Yeah. We want to make sure we're getting as much information to you as possible. And it's really helpful to have a second set of ears.
Especially if there's quite significant hearing loss.
That's right.
Information we give is, we do support it with written information, but it's spoken.
Absolutely. And I think as well, the other reason it's important is that hearing, is communication, and that takes two people. So often if there are problems being caused by that hearing loss, or should I say if there's hearing concerns, it's not just impacting one person, it's probably impacting the person they communicate with the most as well.
Yes.
So you can definitely get two sides of the story if you get someone else coming in, but you can also get that support and that understanding for that communication partner, because they can hear it as well. They can hear why these things are happening.
Yep.
So bring someone to the appointment, I would recommend. We sit down, and I think it's really important to spend quite a bit of time getting to know someone, getting to know why they're there, how is their hearing loss impacting them? That's what we spend a lot of time talking about. What situations are you having trouble in? Where would you like to hear better? Obviously, we ask, the medical case history, the, ear health case history. But I think the real nugget in there is, how is the hearing loss impacting you? So then we can start putting that puzzle together in our mind as an audiologist of how we can help them. Next, we move on to like a battery of tests. So we do lots of different tests. And the reason we do them is what we talked about at the beginning, which is we really need to figure out not just is there a hearing loss there, but what part of the ear is actually being affected, because that's really going to determine what the intervention is going to be. So we look in someone's ears with a little light. We test that middle ear, that eardrum. We test how well it vibrates, because that gives us an idea of how well that middle ear is functioning. And then we do the bit that you're all familiar with. We pop you in a little soundproof booth, pop some headphones on, and get you to push that button when you hear the beep.
I love that. I love that test. It's awesome.
It's a great one. Well,
You might be the only one.
you might. I was going to say you might be the only one. Most people find it quite a difficult test, because what we're asking you to do is really hard. It's a simple test, but you're concentrating really, really hard. But that's definitely something for the audiologist to worry about, and not the person. It's our job to to make sure all of that's going well.
And there we're trying to find the softer sound that the person can hear.
Right.
Yeah, so it's an important test. It's a concentration.
It's a concentration test. We also have to do one more piece of the puzzle, which is that hearing and listening and understanding are actually very different things. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that if we play words at different levels, how do people understand those words? How do they perceive those words? So I think that's a really important part as well. And once we've done those tests, we can really get such a good picture of exactly what's going on in that person's ear with that person's hearing. And so we dedicate the rest of the appointment to really making sure they understand that. I think that's so important, especially to doing well with intervention. I think if someone understands how their hearing is being impacted, they can really understand why they need to take the next step, and then explaining to them what their options might be.
Yeah. And it sounds like the duty of care and just the care you guys take is fantastic. How long would this take on average?
The hearing assessment?
Yeah.
About 75 minutes.
Okay.
So as I said, it's a comprehensive appointment.
Yeah.
I think it's so well worth the visit to the audiologist once a year.
100%. Yeah.
Jordan, as an audiologist, how do you sort of choose which is the best option for your client or your patient that comes in?
That's the thing. It's a bit of a puzzle, isn't it? You're putting together, all the information they've told you and the results. And I think the easiest thing and the easiest way that I can navigate it is that I have access at Lions Hearing Clinic to all of the different options that the patient may need to access.
Yeah.
We've got, it depends on the patient's hearing loss, but we've got a wide variety of, like a wide portfolio of different devices that we can choose from.
Yeah.
So we can really think about, what do they need? What are they trying to achieve? And what is the most appropriate option for them?
Right.
So, Jordan, but it's not only just devices, isn't it? If somebody presents with ringing in the ears, it's making that tinnitus referral. If somebody, maybe is a bit dizzy, or, you can refer them for a balance assessment. So it's really bringing services and devices, both hearing aids and implants, together to give them.
I think that's so important. I think it's really helpful for the patient as well, or the client, because it's not just about devices then. It's really about their whole hearing health. And I think, it takes people a really long time to come in to see us. The research does say, 7, 8, 9 years for people to act on their hearing loss. And I think some of that is this sort of hesitation or trepidation about getting hearing devices. So it's really nice to come into a place where it's not all just about hearing aids. It's about what is the most appropriate solution for you, and also looking at the whole hearing health as a picture. So as you said, if there is tinnitus there, if they could benefit from a cochlear implant, being able to send them within the same organisation for that care is really, really important.
So in layperson's term, a one-stop shop.
Exactly. Couldn't have put it better.
If I want to come and see you, do I need a GP referral or?
No, you actually don't. So
Okay.
people can self-refer.
Yeah. Oh, great. So I don't need a GP referral. Who typically should go and see an audiologist?
I'm really glad that you asked that question.
Well, thank you.
So I think the people who need to see an audiologist are people who are either at risk for hearing loss or people who are experiencing hearing concerns.
Okay.
So people at risk for hearing loss would be people who have ringing or buzzing in the ears. We call it tinnitus. People with vertigo, so the sensation of the world spinning while you're standing still. Because both of those conditions, I think you may have already learned about in other episodes, are really highly associated with hearing loss. As we said before, anyone with a history of noise exposure, they really should be coming in for a test as well.
Mm-hmm.
And as we talked about at the beginning, anyone in that sort of age range where the prevalence is creeping up. So we sort of say, at the age of 55, 60, maybe start getting that first hearing check just to come in and get that baseline and see where your hearing's at so we can monitor over time. You'd be surprised how many people come in and they say, well, when did this happen? How did this happen, this hearing loss? But we have no previous results. We can't tell them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are, in terms of the risk factors, those are the people who should be coming in, and anyone with hearing concerns. So, things like asking for repeats, pardon, what was that? Pardon. If you're doing that, could be a sign of hearing.
TV volume is starting to sort of
Probably the most common one.
Yes.
People mumble. People always say to me, if everyone spoke like you, Jordan, I wouldn't need I wouldn't, I wouldn't be here now. But if the idea or the feeling that people are mumbling can be a sign of hearing loss. And difficulties hearing in background noise. That background noise, like restaurants and cafes, those things starting to become more difficult can also be a sign of hearing loss as well. So that's what you kind of want to be looking out for. And anyone falling into that really should be coming in for a hearing check.
Right.
Jordan, now we know who needs to come and see an audiologist. But how do we choose an audiologist? How do we know where to go?
Well, if you're asking me and you're in, Perth or the Southwest, I would say go to Lions Hearing Clinic.
Clearly.
So I think that's a pretty easy choice. But really what you're looking for is, working with a clinician who wants to work with you to get those good outcomes, who will listen to what kind of concerns that you're actually having, and who has access to, a wide portfolio of solutions that they can offer you.
Yeah. All right. So, Jordan, let's say I came in and saw you.
Yep.
And my hearing test indicated that a hearing aid is recommended.
Mm-hmm.
What type of devices are available, and how would I decide personally on which one to choose?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. We'd probably have to ask you quite a few more questions before I could make that recommendation, because there really is no one best device or, a one-size-fits-all solution. It is a very personalized choice. Mm-hmm. And that's because there's so much technology in hearing aids. There's so many different kinds of devices that we really have the opportunity to marry sort of what you need with a device or with features. So that's generally what we'd be doing. And that's why we spend that time at the beginning of the appointment. We're trying to think, firstly, what is this person's ability to maybe manage a hearing aid? How is their dexterity? How is their cognition? How is their vision? Hearing aids can have small parts. So, maybe if dexterity was an issue, we'd be thinking something like a rechargeable battery. That's an example of where my mind might go, for a particular person. Where people spend a lot of their time is also a really big factor. Somebody who is attending lectures and meetings and has, group meetings for their young children and is out and about all the time has a very different lifestyle and a very different need for technology than someone who potentially has, a visitor once a week and mostly wants to hear the television. The two devices that we might recommend for those people are very, very different. So there's many, many different options, but it's about finding the right one for you. In terms of, just generally what styles are available, they come in so many different shapes and sizes and colors and all different things. You can get hearing aids that sit fully in the ear. You can get hearing aids that have a portion that sit behind the ear. You can even get the really, really invisible hearing aid called the Lyric, which is inserted very, very deep in the ear with a microscope. So there's so many different options, and it really comes down to what you need.
And talking to audiologists about options.
Please do. I think that's a really great way to prepare for your appointment as well, is really think about, where am I having trouble and where would I like help? And then we'll be able to really discuss that with you.
And so then I get a particular device to suit me. What happens then? Is there a follow-up?
Yeah, so the next part would actually be the fitting of the hearing aid. So that's a really important part. It's really important that a qualified audiologist does that fitting, So a hearing aid isn't just something, you get off the shelf. It's actually really finely tuned to your hearing results.
Yeah.
The way you have a prescription for your eyes, you also have a prescription for your ears. And it's really important that we set those hearing aids very specifically to that prescription.
Yeah.
So we do that at a fitting. And then before we sign anyone off on hearing aids, we really need to make sure, firstly, the hearing aids are meeting their goals. And secondly, we can show a benefit with those devices.
Yeah, right.
So that's sort of the next step immediately after picking the device. But then there is definitely aftercare and sort of follow-up that's needed as well. And generally that happens at an annual.
Okay, yeah.
Jordan, in this series, we're speaking to Dr. Rob Eichelboom about epidemiology and the link between hearing loss and other conditions. And the risk of falls are higher in those people with hearing loss.
Correct.
And have you got much experience with, I know there's now devices that actually sort of can tell you if you've fallen, or it can call your significant other if you've had a fall.
Yeah, correct. I think it's really nice to see sort of the features coming into hearing aids that support the research that's out there about the link between hearing and health. And we do supply those kinds of hearing aids. So we've got our Live Well range at Lions, which have different features in them that help with those kind of things. So correct, exactly one of those features is falls detection. So because, the hearing aids sit on the ear, if someone falls over, it's a really good way to be able to detect that they've actually fallen over. So that's definitely something that's come in as a feature.
That's amazing. Well, Jordan, this has been fantastic. Thank you. We've actually got a couple of listener questions, which is very exciting. Love to get your feedback on these, as I'm sure there's other people out there who might have similar questions. Tim comments that as someone with long-term hearing loss, one of the main issues he faces is his wife's understanding of his condition and how they communicate with each other. What advice would you have for Tim and his wife?
Okay, I'm really glad that Tim submitted this question.
Yeah.
I think it's really, really important. Firstly, I think it's important to draw attention to the fact that this is super common. So it's really, really common for hearing loss to impact that kind of, it can impact the connection with other people, it can impact communication with other people, and it can really impact these kind of relationships because that's the person that you're speaking to the most. I would have questions for Tim, and I would have questions for his wife. So the first thing I would be saying to Tim was, have you had your hearing checked recently? If you've got hearing aids, do you wear them all the time? Have you been back for your adjustment? Because if he has, and if he is, I always say to my patients, you're doing your part then. You're doing as much as you can do. You've got a hearing loss and you're wearing the aid to help that hearing loss, and that aid has been adjusted and it's all working beautifully. So you really need the help of the people around you and the understanding of the people around you to improve the communication strategies that you're using. And it's so easy for us to use very poor communication strategies in the home. So one thing that we do in our appointments, and I actually would really encourage Tim's wife to come in for an appointment so we can talk about this all together, is talk about different communication strategies that we can use to improve these kind of things. So stuff that's generally pretty self-explanatory, like, come into the room when you're speaking to me.
Say their name.
This is such a good one. This is the key one that I was going to say, because I think this is one that people aren't always aware of. But if you can call attention to someone before you give them the message that you're trying to give them, they will understand and they will attend so much easier. So I think that's really the key, is calling someone's name first, minimizing that distance, those kind of things. So I think my two sort of messages to Tim would be, firstly, it's a really common experience for people with hearing loss. But secondly, if you're doing everything that you can in terms of wearing your hearing aid, bring your wife in. Let's have a bit of a discussion together about how we can get you guys communicating really well.
Awesome.
Jordan, another one, a communication strategy that I really like is when somebody sort of says something and you didn't hear it and you go, what? That person is most often going to repeat it exactly the same. And there may be something in that sentence that you just can't hear because of the type of hearing loss that you have. So if there's something you heard, let's go out for dinner tonight. You heard some of it, but you don't know what they said. You go, dinner? But then the person will go, yeah, dinner tonight.
Yeah.
They'll go, oh, yeah, we should go out for dinner tonight.
Right.
So say what you've heard, and then that person will change what they say and then
fill in the gaps. Yeah.
fill in the gaps, and you're more likely to pick it up. Otherwise, you just go, what? They say the same. You go, what? They say the same, and then that's really hard.
You can hang around my house.
Another thing is rephrasing. Finding a different way to say it. I mean, we talked earlier that certain hearing loss will impact certain pitches, and if you think about words, they might contain, certain pitches of sound. So if you can find a different way to say it, you actually might stumble across a sort of combination of sounds that's a lot easier for that person to hear.
Right. Well, yeah, Jordan, where she spoke to Dr. Beck Bennett last season.
Oh, wow.
About the emotional impacts of hearing loss, and it was a really great episode. So maybe Tim and his wife could listen together.
I would strongly recommend that. I think that would be a really, really good thing for them both to do. Yeah.
Great.
Jordan, we've had another listener write in to us, Ruby. So Ruby asked, what are the pros and cons of wearing a hearing aid at an early stage of age-related hearing loss? Jordan, do you have some advice for Ruby about the pros and cons of wearing a hearing device at an earlier stage?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of pros, many, many pros to early intervention. And we talk about this all the time with our clients. I talk about it all the time with referrers. Early intervention really does improve outcomes with, devices, especially with hearing aids. Our hearing will come down gradually over time. As I said, there's not really much we can do to prevent that. And wearing hearing aids isn't necessarily going to stop that process either. I think that's important to know. But what hearing aids actually do is, because remember how I said they're set very specifically for your hearing. So you've got a prescription for your ears. That's giving the brain that sound back that it's missing and keeping that nerve stimulated. So what we see after many, many, many years of untreated hearing loss is that ability to understand those words, that test that I was telling you about where we see, how well can they hear and understand words at certain levels, we can see that can deteriorate. And so if the hearing deteriorates over time, that's not really a big concern, because what we can do is we can adjust the hearing aids louder, or eventually, potentially, we could refer them for an implant assessment. But what we really want to do is make sure that we're keeping those speech scores nice and strong, because that will determine how well you do with hearing aids. If you think about it, hearing aids help to turn words up. But if we turn words up as loud as they go and you're not hearing those words any better, the hearing aid is going to struggle with that. So I think, that's one of the benefits of early intervention, is that you can stimulate that ear from an earlier stage and keep that ear nice and strong. In terms of other pros, I mean, when we're thinking about our overall health, we've talked about it. I think you've talked about it a lot in this podcast, but there's many links between hearing and our health. And one of those things, and I think something that's bringing a lot more people in sooner to the clinic, is the link between hearing and cognition and people's cognitive health. So that's definitely another thing as well, is by intervening with hearing aids early, we may be able to reduce our risk of cognitive decline. And that's because hearing and cognition are really linked as well. And actually, I mean, one of the main benefits to intervening early is that you can get back to hearing again sooner. We spoke about that earlier. I mean, with Tim and his wife, for example, your hearing can have a real impact on people and their ability to, engage in different activities and with different people. So intervening early, keeps you socially active and keeps you connected to the people around you sooner. So I would say it's mostly pros.
Yes.
So Jordan, all those hearing aids sitting in the drawer really need to come out of the drawer.
Definitely. I also think it's really important to point out that lots of people do really well with hearing aids. So people do really well with their hearing aids, but for people who maybe aren't wearing them all the time or aren't wearing them regularly, they really should be coming back in. They can be adjusted. We've got so many tricks up our sleeves. You'd be surprised the amount of times people aren't wearing their hearing aid for something as simple as, it's not sitting well in the ear, or it's a bit uncomfortable, and I can fix it, like that on the spot. But I think the most important thing is just wearing that hearing aid consistently all the time, because that's what's going to stimulate the ear over time. And as I said before, that untreated hearing loss can be, the untreated hearing loss can result in that ear not being stimulated the way it should. And not only does that have impact on the outcomes with hearing aids, but it can also impact our candidacy for implants down the track. So it's really, really important to wear that hearing aid so that we can keep that pathway strong and keep all of our options open in terms of our hearing solutions that's available to us.
Yeah. So clearly, Jordan, lots of pros. Any cons?
There's not a lot of cons to taking that first step and giving hearing aids a go. There's some of the things that can sort of impact people's progress with hearing aids is maybe if they're really not ready yet for hearing aids. And I think that's something, it shouldn't stop you from going to see the audiologist though, because if someone was to come see me and I could see, look, I'm really not ready to do anything, there's just concerns in the way, then it becomes my job to address those concerns either in the appointment or over time. And we can make sort of a plan for that patient over time. So I don't think people have anything to lose by coming into the audiologist, but I also don't think they have that much to lose by giving something a go. If they are ready but they're, a little bit hesitant, hearing aids do take a bit of work, but we can help guide people through that work. And so I guess, the main con would be if someone was really, really not ready to take that step, but that shouldn't stop them from coming to see an audiologist.
And clearly they come and see you, but don't want to have the hearing aids straight away. They've got time to process and maybe
absolutely
a couple of months down the track are ready to,
and you'd be surprised the amount of times that people come in, they're resolute, they're not ready. And, you just acknowledge that. You say, I'm hearing that from you, but, this is the information that I've got to give you.
Yeah.
And, 3-6 months down the track, they're back.
They're back.
It can be the same with trying hearing aids. If you give something a go and it doesn't quite work for you, you're not ready at that time, you'd be surprised again the amount of people who come back, a few months later or a year later, but they're so much more prepared for that experience then. They've given something a go. They've made an informed choice. Look, it's not for me right now.
Yep.
By the time they come back, all of that sort of nervousness that they had before has gone away because they're really prepared for the experience.
Yep.
So I don't really think there's any cons that I can think of to giving hearing aids a go.
Well, we'd love to thank Tim and Ruby for writing to us. If you have a question you'd like us to cover, you can write to us via our podcast homepage. The link is in the show notes.
Jordan, what are the key takeaways that you would like to share with our listeners in this Hearing 101 overview? So we know, take the hearing aids
out of the drawer.
Take them out of the drawer. Please take them and go and see the audiologist if they're not working well and you've got all your tricks up your sleeve. But what are the other takeaways?
Yeah, I would say protect your ears, Don't put yourself at risk of hearing loss if you don't have to be. So making sure that our ears are protected. Making sure people understand who's at risk for hearing loss and don't delay. That would be my main takeaway.
Yep.
Don't delay for the appointment. Come in for the test and don't delay on taking that first step with your hearing.
Well, Jordan, thank you so much for joining us on today's podcast. You've given such a great overview of hearing health. You've really covered a lot of important information to help us understand how we hear, what causes hearing loss, and how to protect our hearing. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Jordan.
Make sure to tune into the next episode with Dr. Tommy Lai called Hearing and Your GP. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are recording this podcast on, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and the land on which you're listening from. We pay respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. If you've enjoyed this episode, let us know by rating and reviewing this podcast or sharing it with a friend or family member. Make sure you're subscribed so you won't miss an episode. To view this episode as a video with captions, visit the Ear Science YouTube channel or our website www.earscience.org.au/podcast. You can also visit our website to suggest a topic for a future episode, for links to more information and all the research papers on this topic that we have discussed today. This podcast provides information of a general nature and does not constitute medical advice. The producer of the Ear Science podcast, The Science of Healthy Hearing, is Emma Ireland, with sound engineering and editing by myself, Dan Vandermeer.